A census taker once tried to test me. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti. The Silence of the Lambs wasn't just another psychological thriller. It was a cultural earthquake that reshaped how Hollywood treated crime, horror, and character study. On screen, it looked smooth, haunting, and precise. But behind the camera, chaos lurked everywhere. Unexpected accidents, chilling actor transformations, and studio battles that nearly derailed it. Today, we're peeling back the mask to reveal 20 weird facts about The Silence of the Lambs, stories of danger, obsession, and genius that most fans never hear. And stay tuned, because the bonus fact at the end will make you look at Hannibal Lecter in a way you never imagined. Let's step inside the cell and begin. Anthony Hopkins terrified the crew before the cameras rolled. Anthony Hopkins' performance as Hannibal Lecter is legendary, but what audiences didn't know is how deeply unsettling he became even before the director yelled action. Hopkins would arrive to set in full Lecter mindset, cold, calculating, and eerily still. Crew members described him as not blinking for long stretches, which made technicians nervous during rehearsals. Jonathan Demme, the director, encouraged Hopkins to hold silence between takes, creating an uncomfortable atmosphere for everyone. Hopkins' stillness wasn't an accident. He carefully modeled it after reptiles, who conserve energy until they strike. The result? Even the crew felt preyed upon when standing near him. This wasn't acting in the traditional sense. It was immersion so intense that camera operators sometimes had to look away. Hopkins wasn't Hannibal Lecter on screen. He was Hannibal Lecter the moment he stepped on set. Jodie Foster refused to rehearse the final scene. Not every terrifying moment in The Silence of the Lambs was scripted. The climactic exchange between Clarice Starling and Hannibal Lecter had a chilling authenticity because Jodie Foster refused to rehearse it. Foster admitted later that she was genuinely afraid of Anthony Hopkins. She believed rehearsals would dull her fear, so she avoided practicing the infamous cell dialogue. Instead, she wanted her nervous body language, shaky breathing, darting eyes, to be completely real. This decision shocked Jonathan Demme, who usually insisted on rehearsals for precision. But when he saw the raw footage, he realized her instinct was right. Foster's visible terror didn't just sell the scene, it elevated the entire film. It wasn't polished acting, it was survival instinct captured on film. That's why the confrontation remains one of cinema's most unnerving conversations. The night vision sequence nearly broke the shoot. The basement night vision sequence, where Buffalo Bill stalks Clarice in complete darkness, looks seamless on screen, but filming it was grueling. The special infrared-style effect was achieved with green-tinted night vision cameras, which were notoriously unreliable. The crew had to rehearse blind, navigating total darkness with only minimal safety lights. Ted Levine, playing Buffalo Bill, was required to move silently, his hand inches away from Foster's face without touching her. One slip, and Foster could have been injured. To make matters worse, the cameras overheated under extended takes. Crew members had to rotate equipment constantly while Foster stayed in character, trembling in the blackness. The claustrophobia wasn't fabricated. It was real. Audiences saw a terrifying predator-prey moment. But the truth is, both actors were stumbling through technical chaos, relying only on instinct and trust. The fava beans line was improvised in spirit. That iconic line about fava beans and Chianti wasn't just a creepy flourish. It carried a hidden layer most viewers missed. The script included the line, but Hopkins' chilling hiss and delivery were entirely his invention. Medical experts later pointed out something fascinating. Lecter's line isn't just culinary nonsense, it's a sly reference to MAO inhibitors, a class of psychiatric drugs that don't allow patients to consume beans, wine, or liver. In other words, Lecter was bragging about being off his meds and fully dangerous. What audiences thought was quirky cannibal humor was actually a coded taunt to psychiatrists. Hopkins amplified this with his infamous sucking noise, which wasn't in the script at all. It was pure inspiration in the moment, and it terrified Foster so much that her reaction in the take is genuine. The real FBI was heavily involved, and it got uncomfortable. The FBI didn't just consult on The Silence of the Lambs, they immersed the production in real investigative methods. Jodie Foster shadowed FBI trainees at Quantico, studying their movements, speech patterns, and note-taking. But the influence didn't stop at training. The Bureau saw the film as a recruitment tool, believing Clarice's character could inspire women to join. Foster admitted it was surreal. Her acting was being used as propaganda. Agents even gave director Jonathan Demme access to crime scene files and psychological profiles of real killers. The problem? Some material was too disturbing for cast members, leaving them shaken. Foster reportedly had nightmares after reading transcripts of real interviews with murderers. It wasn't just research, it was exposure to darkness so raw that even Hollywood veterans felt rattled. Buffalo Bill's dance almost didn't happen. The infamous scene where Buffalo Bill performs his eerie dance was on the verge of being cut. Ted Levine fought to keep it, arguing it revealed Bill's fractured psychology. Jonathan Demme hesitated, fearing it would alienate audiences, but Levine convinced him it was essential. Levine prepared for weeks, watching tapes of underground drag performances and studying how identity confusion could manifest physically. When cameras rolled, the crew reportedly fell silent. It was too disturbing to even watch through the monitors. Levine later said it was the most vulnerable performance of his career. What audiences saw wasn't exploitation. It was an unfiltered glimpse into a mind unraveling, and Levine's courage in fighting for it gave the film one of its most haunting moments. Without that scene, Buffalo Bill would have been terrifying. With it, he became unforgettable. Anthony Hopkins barely appears in the film. Hannibal Lecter feels omnipresent, but Anthony Hopkins is actually on screen for just 16 minutes. That brevity makes his performance one of the most economical in film history. Hopkins studied how Shakespearean villains like Iago dominate plays with minimal stage time, then applied the same technique here. He deliberately slowed his speech and reduced his movements, forcing audiences to hang on every word. Hopkins later explained, "I wanted Lecter to feel like he was in control, even when chained. The result is psychological gravity. Scenes feel like they orbit him. This minimal presence was risky. In early cuts, studio execs feared audiences wouldn't get enough Lecter, but Demme fought to keep it lean. The gamble worked. Hopkins won an Oscar for one of the shortest Best Actor performances ever. Not quantity, but intensity. That's what made Lecter immortal." Jodie Foster's accent sparked backstage battles. Jodie Foster's Southern accent became a point of behind-the-scenes controversy. She crafted it meticulously, modeling it on young women from rural Virginia. But some crew members and even a few producers criticized it as too heavy, fearing audiences would find it distracting. Foster stood her ground. She argued that Clarice's voice was part of her identity, an outsider struggling in a male-dominated, elitist FBI world. To Foster, toning it down would erase the very vulnerability that defined the character. The tension peaked during editing, when sound engineers suggested redubbing some lines. Demme sided with Foster, insisting authenticity mattered more than polish. History proved her right. The accent became a cornerstone of Clarice's believability. Not perfection, but imperfection made Clarice relatable, and that humanity is why the performance won Foster her second Oscar. The insect clues were real and disgusting. When Clarice examines the moth cocoon pulled from a victim's throat, the horror wasn't entirely fictional. The production team used actual entomologists, bringing in real insects for authenticity. Jars of death's head moths were kept on set, bred specifically for filming. Handling them wasn't pleasant. Jodie Foster confessed that she hated working with the bugs, especially when they were placed near her mouth for close-up shots. Technicians carefully inserted the cocoon prop, but the realism of the wriggling larvae unsettled everyone. Entomologist Doug Emlin later admitted that the idea of using the moth as a symbol of transformation was scientifically inaccurate, but cinematically brilliant. The insects weren't just props. They were metaphors crawling right into audiences' nightmares. What should have been a minor detail became a grotesque symbol of metamorphosis, both for Buffalo Bill and his victims. The crew was terrified of Ted Levine off-set. Ted Levine's performance as Buffalo Bill was so convincing that it bled into his off-camera presence. Crew members admitted avoiding him between takes, unsettled by his ability to shift instantly from casual conversation into chilling menace. Levine himself felt the weight. He later said, "I carried Bill around for months. It messed with my head." His family worried about his emotional health during filming. Even Jodie Foster avoided prolonged contact, fearing she'd lose her genuine sense of unease during scenes. The role nearly typecast Levine. For years, he struggled to land parts outside the psychotic killer mold. He eventually rebuilt his career with character roles, but the shadow of Buffalo Bill lingered. It wasn't just acting. It was transformation so total it blurred reality, and the people around him felt it creeping under their skin. Hopkins modeled Lecter's voice on multiple icons. Anthony Hopkins didn't just invent Hannibal Lecter's voice on the spot. He built it from a chilling patchwork of influences. He blended the calm authority of HAL 9000 from 2001, A Space Odyssey, the clipped precision of Katharine Hepburn, and the sinister calm of his own Welsh schoolteachers. Hopkins wanted the voice to feel both comforting and predatory. He explained, "I thought, What if the most dangerous man in the room also spoke like a doctor reassuring a patient? The juxtaposition created unease, soothing tones delivering horrific words. Producers were initially uncertain, fearing audiences might laugh, but on screen it became hypnotic. Lecter's voice wasn't loud or theatrical, it was surgical, dissecting the silence between words. What audiences didn't know is that every syllable was carefully engineered, not madness, but a masterpiece of vocal control. The prison cell was designed to break symmetry. Hannibal Lecter's glass-walled cell looked sleek and clinical, but its design carried a hidden psychological trick. Production designer Christy Zaya built it deliberately asymmetrical, subtly off-balance to make viewers feel unsettled. The lighting was harsh, bouncing reflections off the glass, while the floor tiles were fractionally misaligned. Even the bars behind the glass weren't evenly spaced. The effect was subconscious. The human brain craves symmetry, and its absence causes unease. Anthony Hopkins noticed it immediately, saying it made him feel caged but also strangely powerful. Cinematographer Tak Fujimoto used wide lenses to exaggerate the distortion, making Lecter's space feel too close for comfort. Audiences never consciously saw the EA flaws, but they felt them, like something was always just slightly wrong. It wasn't just a prison cell. It was a psychological weapon disguised as architecture. The film faced brutal censorship battles. The Silence of the Lambs didn't glide smoothly into theaters. Censors in several countries debated banning or heavily editing it, calling Buffalo Bill's scenes grotesquely deviant. Some critics accused the film of demonizing queer identities, sparking protests before its release. Jonathan Demme fought to defend the film's complexity, but the studio feared boycotts. Early cuts circulated with certain Buffalo Bill moments trimmed, but test audiences said the edits neutered the fear. Ultimately, Demme won, but the debate never stopped. Even at the Academy Awards, activists protested outside, holding signs accusing Hollywood of reinforcing harmful stereotypes. The controversy became part of the film's legacy, both a groundbreaking thriller and a lightning rod for cultural criticism. It wasn't just a horror movie, it was a cultural battleground where representation, fear, and art collided. The Lamb scream scene nearly got cut. The title scene, where Clarice recalls the haunting memory of Lamb's screaming, was almost left on the cutting room floor. Studio executives worried it slowed the pace, arguing audiences wouldn't connect with an abstract childhood trauma. But Jodie Foster fought fiercely for it. She believed the story's emotional heart lay in that confession, exposing Clarice's desperate need to save the helpless. Foster poured herself into the monologue, so shaken that she reportedly cried once cameras cut. Demme later admitted it was one of the hardest scenes to shoot. No stunts, no effects, just raw performance. He compared it to watching someone bleed on screen without moving a muscle. Keeping it was a gamble. Cutting it would have made the film leaner. But with it, Clarice became more than an FBI agent. She became a symbol of empathy fighting against indifference. Hopkins never blinks. On purpose. One of the eeriest details about Hannibal Lecter is his gaze. Audiences feel pinned by it, as though he's dissecting them through the screen. That wasn't an accident. Hopkins deliberately avoided blinking in Lecter's key scenes. He believed predators maintain unbroken eye contact with prey, and he wanted Lecter to radiate that same intensity. It unnerved Jodie Foster so much that she sometimes lost her lines mid-scene, caught in his unrelenting stare. Cinematographer Tak Fujimoto heightened the effect by placing cameras directly in Hopkins's eyeline, forcing audiences into Clarice's perspective. The result was a uniquely participatory terror. Viewers didn't just watch Lecter, they felt watched by him. It wasn't a gimmick. It was an acting choice that became an iconic part of horror history. Silence wasn't just in the title, it lived in his eyes. Hopkins and Foster never had a full conversation on set. Despite their electric chemistry, Anthony Hopkins and Jodie Foster barely spoke off camera. Foster later revealed she was too intimidated, saying, "I was terrified of him. I avoided eye contact as much as possible." Hopkins, staying in character, didn't break the tension either. This distance paid off. The awkward silences and nervous hesitations on screen weren't rehearsed. They were real. Foster admitted that during Lecter's first mocking line about Clarice's accent, her flinch was genuine humiliation. Years later, at a reunion, Foster confessed she had been too scared to say much during production. Hopkins replied, "I was afraid of you too." The irony? Their mutual fear created one of the most believable power dynamics in movie history. Not co-stars sharing banter, predatory distance that turned into cinematic electricity. Lecter's first appearance was timed like a magic trick. Jonathan Demme studied the mechanics of stage magicians when designing Hannibal Lecter's first reveal. He wanted the audience to feel ambushed, not by violence, but by stillness. Instead of showing Lecter pacing, eating, or moving, Demme staged him upright in the center of his cell, motionless, already waiting for Clarice. Hopkins called it unnerving stillness, inspired by Dracula's statuesque entrances. The shot was rehearsed like choreography. Every step Foster took was mapped so the reveal had maximum impact. It worked. Audiences expected a madman thrashing in chains. Instead, they got calm, control, and intelligence waiting in silence. The horror wasn't what he did. It was what he didn't do. That entrance didn't just introduce a character. It announced a monster who didn't need movement to dominate. The film won a rare Big Five sweep at the Oscars. At the 1992 Academy Awards, The Silence of the Lambs achieved something almost no film has, the Big Five sweep. It won Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, and Best Adapted Screenplay. Only two other films in history, It Happened One Night, 1934, and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, 1975, had ever done the same. But the victory wasn't guaranteed. Studio executives were nervous that voters wouldn't embrace such a disturbing film. Campaigning was delicate. They sold it less as horror and more as a crime drama. The gamble worked. Hopkins' 16 minutes of screen time became the shortest Best Actor win ever. Foster cemented herself as one of the most powerful actresses of her generation. And Jonathan Demme proved that horror could earn prestige without compromise. It wasn't just a win. It was vindication for the genre. The real inspiration was even more disturbing. While Buffalo Bill was loosely based on several real killers, the production team dug into grisly real-world details. Ed Gein's skinning of victims, Ted Bundy's fake arm cast to lure women, and Gary Heidnick's basement captivity all were woven into Bill's character. FBI advisors revealed case files so graphic that some cast members refused to read them. Ted Levine absorbed them reluctantly, later saying, "I didn't want Bill to feel like a caricature, but it was horrifying to know these things really happened." What audiences didn't realize was that almost every disturbing behavior in the film was lifted from reality. Buffalo Bill wasn't invention. He was a mirror of history's darkest corners, stitched together into a single monster. That's why the horror lingers. It's not fully fictional. Hopkins wrote Hannibal's backstory in secret. Anthony Hopkins didn't just read the script. He secretly wrote his own detailed backstory for Hannibal Lecter, pages of notes that never appeared on screen. He imagined Lecter's childhood, his education, his first violent impulses, even his grooming habits. Hopkins later admitted he never shared it with Demme. The notes were for himself alone, a private blueprint that anchored every movement. He believed Lecter wasn't crazy, but hyper-rational, every action logical within his worldview. That unseen preparation gave Lecter depth beyond the script. Even when silent, Hopkins radiated history. The audience didn't know it, but every pause, every glance was rooted in a past only Hopkins knew. It wasn't improvisation, it was architecture, a villain built brick by brick in the shadows. Bonus fact, Lecter never blinks at Clarice, but he does at one moment. Here's the twist even hardcore fans often miss. Throughout the film, Hannibal Lecter never blinks when looking at Clarice. His stare is unbroken, predatory, almost inhuman. But there's one exception. In their final conversation, as Clarice recalls the screaming of the lambs, Hopkins allows a tiny blink. Hopkins later revealed it was intentional. For a split second, Lecter felt empathy. Not much, but enough to suggest a flicker of humanity beneath the monster. It's so quick that most viewers miss it. But once you notice, it changes everything. Hannibal Lecter wasn't completely void of feeling. He chose to care, once. The Silence of the Lambs wasn't just a thriller. It was a perfect storm of danger, artistry, and cultural shockwaves that reshaped cinema forever. Every frame hides secrets, some chilling, some brilliant, all unforgettable. If you enjoyed this dive into the shadows, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your favorite Silence of the Lambs moment below. Because in Hollywood, the scariest stories aren't always on screen. They're the ones behind it. I do wish we could chat longer, but I'm having an old friend for dinner.